We have a lot brighter. Oh, that's actually helping a lot. Am I seeing? So Heart of Darkness gone, longest reading. The planning was due last night. I believe currently that puts, there's only like now 5 people left in the running to possibly get the rounding up achievement. And given the difficulty of the midterm, it's probably going to be, I can't round the highest person up to 100. I just don't think. That's just so many points. Maybe the highest person only, because they got like a 76. But everybody else is going to come up more, but not quite that much. I still haven't decided on a number yet. So I'll post it, I think, and I'll post it, I guess, with the curve after I come up with that number. But the plannings are due, and I've already had some people having to submit multiple times. So make sure you submit as early as possible. So you have to do as few. So you have the best chance of getting a research paper in on time. I should be grading the ones that are left. I think there's only like 6 or 7 of them, unless people have submitted some this morning. There were 6 or 7 left last night when I fell asleep. So I'll be finishing those probably just after class. I think I'm going to put that ahead of doing the video editing. And I forgot to edit the video last time. So I'll have to edit the video so that we can have that. And then I'll have to edit today's videos as well. Thank you for the birthday wishes last time. I left that up to show you. I didn't just throw it away. But today I think it's going to be thrown away. In case y'all wanted to take it back, you can take it back. That fluttery thing. It's actually kind of creepy to me from here because it looks like a big smile. Kind of in the back of the room with braces. Because if you think it kind of looks like little braces. Reminds me of seeing like my daughter smile, but like a Joker smile. So today we're talking about, it doesn't seem like many poems, but there's a lot to talk about in those poems. I tend not to focus as much on Underbin Bulbin, but the rest I focus on just plenty. I try to give almost equal time to each, but we'll see. And then the research paper is due Sunday. So even if if you get your research paper planning in on say Thursday and something happens and I'm super busy and I can't grade it until like Sunday, you just, I guess, have to turn something in and hope if you wanted to get the chance of getting that achievement. But I mean, I can guarantee like the things that are turned in like probably today will be graded by this evening, but not necessarily anything turned in after that unless it's a revision. So, are there any questions before we move on to Yeats? Yes?
I turned in the one essay about the, what's the name?
Oh yeah, and I'm moving on to those after the plannings. Yeah. I forgot to mention that part, but yeah. I want to get the discussion post done last night because I want to see where people had problems with Yeats. I don't know, sort of all kinds of problems with Yeats. I guess I saw the most with Sailing to Byzantium and Second Coming. People sort of got James Joyce's. To be honest, it basically looks like people read a summary of it and then are trying to make thoughts based on a summary. Because sometimes it seemed like there was an assumption made about what was in it based on a summary, and those assumptions were incorrect. So we'll just see today. I gotta warn you, like you're gonna be writing your research paper and trying to do the Wasteland at the same time. The Wasteland's hard. It's really hard. And I think the Wasteland makes up maybe 10 questions in the final out of 25. So it's important. Yeah, I believe so. But after the Wasteland, we have some fairly decent, easy poems to kind of close us out. And then after that, it's just presentations and stuff. Yeah, Monday we're going to be talking about the Wasteland, so be prepared. It's a 15-page poem, too, with lots of notes. I would read the one out of the book, not the one you find online, because if you read the one online, it won't make any sense. Reading it without notes is how he designed it originally, but I don't know that he expected you people to be reading it. By you people, I mean people who weren't, like people who are normal, you know? I think he thought people who were mostly going to be reading it were going to be people who read poetry for fun normally, or who analyze poetry for fun normally, not like students currently still in high school who like memes. Like I don't think that was ever his intention for people who are going to be reading it. So to try to read it without any sort of footnotes, maybe you're the kind of person who should be reading it without footnotes. I don't know. I feel like no matter what, when you read it, you sort of get a feeling of kind of what direction it's going, but without footnotes at all, I don't know, it's rough. Maybe get your textbook out, take some pictures of the pages, then when you're laying at bed at night doing the reading, you just pull the pictures up. You know, it's the thing you want to do, just different. You know? You want to look on your phone, you want to zoom. And do y'all read this stuff on your phone usually, I assume? No, you know? You're in the book? Honestly, I've gotten to the point where I like my Kindle so much I hate holding physical books because there's so many variables with holding a physical book. One, it's huge, it's unwieldy, it's bendy. The lines on this page aren't exactly the same every time. Like it's always a slightly different angle. And like I can't just move the thing up and down and hit tab and then move the thing up and then hit tab and make sure every line's the same. Like I don't know, I don't do well with variables, so I understand not wanting to read it out of the book, but I think this is the best case in this scenario. And it's such a long poem, we might not have a chance to go through the whole thing in class, so it's a good thing too to be able to read them. Other questions before we move on? Yep. Well, all right. Let's do this. I think we'll just talk about them in the order that I have them. That makes the most sense to me. Easter 1916, then Second Coming, then Sailing to Byzantium. And we'll probably briefly touch on Under Ben Bulben. Then we'll move on to James Joyce's The Dead. I really don't know if these are available on. How about we do this? Yeats, Easter 1916. How about Yeats Bartleby, Easter 1916? Oh, it's an essay. Nope. Poetry Foundation. Is that the best we're going to get this time? Not a huge fan of this Poetry Foundation with their giant crap everywhere. Inspect. Delete. Well, that was easier than I thought it would be. Now I'm gonna have it up here on the projector. Is this big enough for y'all to see? Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm gonna have it up here on the projector. Do the rest of the people know that classes? Because I've got them still marked as absent, the ones who haven't walked in. So is Bethany is here? She's just not here.
She's coming.
Okay. And the whole back row back there, with the exception of Jordan. So I'm going to pull out my physical copy because Yeats is one of those poets, again, where if you have the notes in front, I don't think you could really understand this without the notes. Did anybody happen to read the note on this? Like what was going on? It'll probably help make the poem make a lot more sense.
Oh, isn't it about like this is like a revolution or something?
Yeah, it was a revolution basically. So it actually starts before there's even a line of the poem. There's a note next to the title, which I'm going to read now, because otherwise I don't think this entire thing makes sense. And it says, during the Easter Rising of 1916, Irish nationalists revolted against the During the Easter Rising of 1916, Irish nationalists revolted against the British government and proclaimed an Irish republic. I can still hear you talking even after I've said shush. Nearly 1,600 Irish volunteers and 200 members of the citizen army seized buildings and a park in Dublin. The rebellion began on Easter Monday, April 24th, 1916, and was crushed in 6 days. So the Irish rebelled against the British government wanting to regain control, and so they took over Dublin, but in 6 days it was taken right back. It didn't take much. Over the next 2 weeks, 15 of the leaders were executed by firing squad. I guess Britain wanted to make an example of them. And Yeats knew the chief nationalist leaders personally. So Yeats was a poet, but what was the lady's name? I always forget for some reason. Maud Gunn. He was really obsessed with this lady named Maud Gunn, who was an actress, and who was also very fervently involved in politics. And through her, he came to know, and I guess through his own, good poetry, he came to know all these political figures, and these political figures were involved in this uprising, and he knew them personally. So it's a little different than, say, some of the, kind of wartime poetry that we usually will get, where it's somebody talking about something that's more or less outside themselves. Like if one of us were to write a poem about 9/11, it would be like we weren't personally involved at all, right? I mean, we didn't know the people who, died or know any of the firefighters. It's a big damn city. And we probably didn't know anybody personally in most cases. I'm sure there are some who did. I could have sworn there was somebody in the class who had come from New York. Yeah. Did you happen to know? Did your family know anybody? I mean, you were probably you weren't even born yet, right?
I moved here when I was 8, I think.
So she wasn't there. She was in New York.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, like 9/11, 2001. That was you had already been born at that point.
Oh no.
Oh, okay, that's what I thought.
My brother was.
Your brother was. So he had a chance of maybe knowing somebody later who was involved in it. But I mean, still, it's not going to be like quite to the degree. Nobody's going to have the situation where it's to the degree where Yeats personally knew many of the people who were involved. I mean, this is kind of the degree to which, like, say, y'all in Quinlan. I mean, I'm assuming y'all have some small like city council thing and school boards, where like literally you probably know a lot of the people from the school board as the parents of the people you go to school with. No? Or like people who are established in the town, they're well-known names, they own businesses in the town or something. Huh?
Big Mo, that's all I know.
Okay.
Like that was big.
It's their language, don't worry about it.
Oh, I guess I'm now old enough to know these people by sight and commerce. I mean, I've been around the town so long, I'm like, oh, I know that person, I know that person, I know that person. That was my old high school teacher. That's a college professor. That person works at the college. That's the old president. I just know like all these people, and then they're the people who are involved in the town. But imagine like all those people become involved in this important political moment, and then they all, like a lot of them end up dying. Not just dying, but getting executed for having done the thing in the first place after the rebellion's crushed. Like that's a personal moment that I don't think we really have any sort of true context for. It'd be like the equivalent of, I'm sure y'all have had somebody, I think y'all had somebody in high school, right, that got killed in a car accident that people knew. But imagine that happened to like a bus full of people, and it was for a cause. So beyond just, oh, this is a terrible bit of bad luck, this was like they did something they thought was right and got executed for it. Like, I don't know, like if a whole, truck full of y'all went down to the border to protest what was happening at the border, and you were executed by the border patrol, for trying to, help free help free the people who were in there. Like, and you knew a bunch of people who had gone down there and got shot. And you're like, oh my gosh, what the hell's happening? It's just like this crazy thing. So that's sort of the situation that Yeats was in. And he's honest with his poem too, where he's not just Maud Gunn, actually the lady that he was obsessed with. He was obsessed with his poetry more. She actually criticized the poem because it's not just a blanket sort of approval of the whole uprising and the people who were involved. I mean, he's honest with his feelings about the uprising and thought that maybe it wasn't going to be successful in the first place, and he was sort of right. So yeah, he knew these people personally who were executed, and then the poem begins. So Ireland's changed a lot in the last few years. But a long time ago, Ireland was trying to find, and Yeats was trying to help Ireland find this. They wanted to find a national identity that wasn't just tied to Catholicism. Like, you used to just say like Irish Catholic, like it was almost like it was just together. But they wanted to find like he wanted to help Ireland find a nationality and a sense of pride in their country that wasn't just tied to Catholicism. And he sort of helped establish that over his life. He's still regarded as an Irish hero. Like, there are statues of him everywhere, like from what he did and what he wrote. So, finally, the poem. It just takes a lot of background to sort of introduce it. He says, I have met them at close of day, coming with vivid faces from counter or desk among gray 18th century houses. He's sort of setting the stage here. I have passed with a nod of the head or polite, meaningless words. Oh, hey, how you doing? Oh, I'm good. How are you? Or have lingered a while and said polite, meaningless words. Oh, how's the weather? And thought before I had done of a mocking tale or a jibe, like telling a joke or something before you break off. To please a companion around the fire at the club, being certain that they and I but lived where motley is worn, all changed utterly, a terrible beauty is born. So that sounds a little confusing, I think, at the beginning, because what we have is he's just describing this kind of happy-go-lucky place. I imagine y'all don't consider Quinlan to be the hotbed of any crazy, dark political things going on. I mean, y'all always joke about the meth.
Who says they're jokes?
Huh?
We're just saying.
I mean, you're saying something that you mean to sound funny, but otherwise you wouldn't be smiling as you said it. You're like, the meth. What now?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch.
There's a large
KKK.
KKK members?
Yeah, like
Look it
there's
up on
like some
YouTube.
big member person that lives there and a bunch of other people.
Yeah, my mom told me that like an African American person went to her high school and then ended up they found his body at the bottom part of the bridge.
That's not good.
Yeah.
You don't want that sort of thing happening
at
at your
Fruitvale, but yeah, Fruitvale's smaller and they have more KKK people.
Is that nearby too? Near Quinlan?
It's not really 45 minutes, but it's still in the area. I think we have KKK area, yeah.
Like what place where they sort of gather?
Yeah.
In Greenville or in?
No, here they protested at Someman's.
They protested.
They made a documentary about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's on YouTube.
Well, okay.
Yeah, Quinlan's why?
Apparently, there's a lot more going on in Quinlan than I thought.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Um,
There's a whole bunch.
But would you ever expect some big, political revolution to happen in Quinlan? Is that something you would think?
I don't think so. I think everybody's just focused on hating the blacks.
My word.
I'm just saying.
Well, everybody fix that.
I'm just saying now. I'm just saying the truth.
We'll try to work on that in your town. I guess that's what I could say. So apparently Quinlan's not quite the same as, say, a number of different towns. But everybody in Quinlan always talks in the classroom as though it's sort of like, Quinlan, ha, ha, ha. And they used to tell, the students used to tell me, we call it Dirty Q. Just sort of the silliness surrounding the way you view your town. I didn't know about all this other serious stuff going on, but that's sort of what he's setting up for Ireland here. It's Ireland, we wear what jesters wear, we're jokesters, we're just people who hang out, have a good time. I feel like a lot of time that, I feel like some sympathy here, it sounds like Texans, often when you have everybody seems so, everything's great and happy, and people are they're so polite, those kind of people. And until you talk about politics. But, it's sort of just that sense that, we're not a serious people. No big things ever happen here. This is not a crazy place other than just the goofiness of it all. And that's sort of what he's setting here. And he says, then all change utterly, a terrible beauty is born. And it's because we've already talked about the Easter Rising. We know that and it's called the Easter Rising because it happened on Easter during that week in 1916. And then he talks about the people, and that's what this whole next stanza is, talks about some of the people who died. He says, that woman's days were spent in ignorant goodwill, her nights in argument until her voice grew shrill. And it says that was specifically referring to Constance Gore Booth and is using details to make it clear that that's her. Her death sentence, though, was reduced to imprisonment, and the other ones were executed. And he says, what voice more sweet than hers when young and beautiful she wrote to harriers? And it says, this man had kept a school and rode our winged horse. So it'd be very easy to trace it to what person here owned a school. Oh, this guy. Pedrick Purse, founder of a boys' school in Dublin and poet, hence the winged horse, or Pegasus, the horse of the muses. But then he says, this other, his helper and friend, was coming into his force. He might have won fame in the end, so sensitive his nature seems, so daring and sweet his thought. Talking about Thomas MacDonagh, who was a poet and dramatist, so yet another poet, and Yeats knew this guy as well. And then this other one, this is a weird one. This sounds kind of weird when you're talking about people that died for a cause. He says, this other man I had dreamed a drunken, vainglorious lout. He had done most bitter wrong to some who are near my heart. So he's actually sort of mildly insulting a guy that he says died for a cause, which is weird. But it says that he was the estranged husband of Maud Gunn, that girl that he was sort of obsessed with. I'm sure you know people in high school where it's like they're not together, but you know if the girl ever gave the guy the light of day and said, okay, I'll date you, the guy would be like, yep. Like, there's that he's been friend zoned. That sort of happened to Yeats. He was friend zoned by Maud Gunn. She would never really get in a relationship with him, but he always had this sort of obsession with her and was very open about the fact that many of his poems were about her. And he really hated that this guy was her estranged husband. I mean, he's not going to lie, though, about the fact that this was the relationship they had before. But he says at the end there, yet I number him in the song. He, too, has resigned his part in the casual comedies. Anybody know what that phrase means, resigned his part in the casual comedy? I'm sorry. I'm reading from the book, but showing it on the thing. Resigned his part in the casual comedy. Here's one thing that kind of makes it difficult to understand is that generally Shakespeare's plays are broken into two types, or I mean three types if you count histories, but in terms of like their endings, there's tragedies and there's comedies. Tragedies usually end in a lot of deaths, like King Lear. Comedies end up usually in marriages or light things happening, something like Much Ado About Nothing, which is the one about love and two people getting together. So when you say comedy, really you just mean a story in which things generally have a happy-go-lucky nature. And when he's saying he's resigned his part, he's no longer playing his part in the casual comedy, a comedy that's not formal, a comedy that's not set up, a story. That story is the story of life. You ever heard, Shakespeare is all the world's a stage? I'm sure we've heard that quote before. And all the men and women merely players. It's essentially implying that life is a play and that he's resigned his part. Another way of just saying he, just like everybody else, they died and their character is no longer on the stage of life. And he says not just that he has died, but he too has been changed in his turn, transformed utterly. A terrible beauty is born. And we hear that phrase again. I think it's the beauty probably that still throws us off, is it not? Like, what is a terrible beauty? Of course, it's a paradox of some kind where he's saying that something can be both terrible and beautiful at the same time.
Beauty, like them just sticking to what they believe?
Yeah, I think so. I imagine at the moment when, I'm just putting it in context, I think everybody will understand. Jesus dies on a cross, right? That's a story in the Bible. I'm sure you've heard of it. Jesus dies on the cross, and everybody's like, that's horrible. Those people are horrible. He got killed. But people also, what do they wear around their necks to this day? Get tattooed on them. Yeah, crosses, which is nothing but a symbol of his torture. But people are like, it's kind of it's a simple image, but it's a terrible yet beautiful symbol of what happened on it. So when it's saying a terrible beauty, it's a horrible thing that happened, but which rendered those that were involved in it beautiful. They gained martyrdom. When somebody dies for a cause, you often hold them up. We have somebody like, say, Martin Luther King or John F. Kennedy. They both believed in some things very strongly and ended up getting, killed by assassins as a result. And it's sometimes that works in the case where literally somebody, you never know what they would have done eventually. In fact, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I could have sworn there were reports that both Martin Luther King and John F. Kennedy had at some point cheated on their spouses. I think it's both of them, actually, even though Martin Luther King is a preacher. But I might be wrong about the Martin Luther King one. I'm fairly sure it's very widely acknowledged that Marilyn Monroe may have been in a relationship with John F. Kennedy. But I don't know history that well. But in that particular scenario, those people, their death for those causes or as a result of those causes, shot them up in the minds of the people. They're like, wow, they died for what they, believed in a sense. it renders somebody, yes, the thing that happens to them is terrible, but it renders them, beautiful as a result. So he's talking about this terrible beauty. They all died for this cause, and that's horrible, but their place in the hearts of the Irish has now risen as a result. So that's beautiful. And then he says this weird stuff, like, basically he's talking about, he's not sure, I think the whole rest of the poem is him saying he's not sure truly if this whole sacrifice will even work. Like if it will have the goal that they originally had for it. Which is kind of sad that he's saying like a terrible beauty is born. But he goes in the next part and said, hearts with one purpose alone through summer and winter. So, people who stubbornly hold to a belief seem enchanted to a stone to trouble the living stream. The horse that comes from the road, the rider, the birds that range from cloud to tumbling cloud, minute by minute they change. A shadow of cloud on the stream changes minute by minute. A horse hoof slides on the brim and a horse plashes within it. The long-legged moor hens dive and hens to moorcocks call. So as a river goes and like in the, everything's happening in nature, the deer move around, the birds fly, the river flows, everything. And he says the minute by minute they live and the stone is in midst of all. So the stone sits there unmoving. So their hearts seem like that. People who have that stubborn, it's kind of like, sort of like the statement that Rapunzel makes at the end of Tangled, where she says, no, mother, like it's over. Like I'm going to fight you. I will fight you forever and ever after this, and I will never stop fighting you. But if you let me save this guy, I'll. So imagine she didn't say that last part. She's just gonna like, I now have a purpose. I'm gonna stubbornly hold to that purpose, and as long as it takes me, I will get away from you. And that's just sort of becomes like, I guess that would have been the goal of her being after that moment if he had not been there, is that she will just get away. And so these people felt that what they thought was right, that Ireland should be able to rule itself, that it should not be merely ruled by Britain. And it says down here in a note that's coming, I really kind of need to mention it now though, that in 1914 the English government had passed Home Rule for Ireland into law. So they said that Ireland can rule itself. But because of World War I happening, just 2 years later they suspended it. And they said, well, we're going to have to put that on suspension. We rule you again because we have a war we got to fight, and then we'll give it back to you afterwards. Which, I mean, that almost sounds like, you guys turn 18 and your parents are like, okay, no curfew, you do what you want, I'll let you be in control of your own life now. And then 20 rolls along and they're like, yeah, you have a curfew again. Sorry, we tried it out, but we have an emergency situation. You now have to, your whatever money you make is going to come to the family. And you're just like, I don't want that. And they're like, well, you don't really have a choice in the matter. We've gotten approval for it from something. Somehow they subverted the idea of adulthood, and they've now legally got the case to have you provide all those things. And you're like, what the hell? Like, you'd be pissed, right? You'd be like, that's not right. It's sort of that, like, they considered their home rule to be like, okay, we're now a country. That's us. They'd be like, no, we suspended it. Never mind. And they're really pissed about it. So these people are the hearts with one purpose alone. They're the ones that are like, Ireland deserves its sovereignty. It deserves to rule itself. And Yeats thinks, maybe you're pushing a little too hard. You can tell by the way he writes about it, because he says, too long a sacrifice, the next stanza. I literally didn't even slide down for that, I'm sorry. He says, too long a sacrifice can make a stone of the heart. Oh, when may it suffice? He says if we sacrifice too long, sometimes our hearts can become stone. Like if you spend too much time sacrificing, too much time pushing in one direction, I almost think he's saying like you no longer can understand anything outside that perspective.
School?
Huh?
School? Like whenever we get out, we don't exactly know what to do.
Maybe, yeah, in a different sense. It's not like you guys are gung-ho about school. I have to do school. I care about it so much. Otherwise, you'd be like, I'm going to read every one of those readings that Nichols gave me and love it.
Okay.
Because what an opportunity it is to learn. Like, that would be like maybe the full equivalent. You're just like, I got to do this because somebody's making me. Or because I have to have a future. But this is more like these people have pushed themselves to this purpose for so long and so hard. It reminds me of like anybody who becomes an extremist of a belief. Where you get to a point where you believe that belief so extremely that you wonder if you're sort of pushing past the very idea or if you're believing something sensible. I'm sure that's how a lot of people feel right now who are, the people who had said, okay, well, I hate the idea of abortion, I don't like it. And so you're like, I'm not going to vote for anything involving abortion. And then they go, okay, well, we're going to, basically you keep voting people who don't believe in abortion. And then what happens is sex education program funding is going down. Planned Parenthoods are closing. Access to abortion is going away. Life expectancy has actually started going down again. And you might be like, well, now hold on. I didn't realize that was all going to be part of it. I had just made this my issue. This was my thing. I have to make this the most important thing in my world. And at some point you start thinking about what all those effects will be and you become so married to that idea that you start having that issue as well. And I'm sure that the Democrats are worried about that sort of thing right now as well. Not the abortion thing, but something different where, Obamacare seemed absurd a few years ago, right? Everybody's like, Affordable Care Act, where people will have to buy insurance and will have more coverage for Americans. And everybody was like, that pisses me off because I have to pay taxes. They're making me do this. And so I think the Republicans have now gotten rid of the requirement to have to be at least on something. You can now, I think, opt out of that or not to pay a fine or whatever if you don't have insurance. And it almost seems like to some people, you look at the Democrats and they're like, man, they seem to have doubled down on it because instead of saying, no, we need to get the Affordable Care Act, they're like, Medicare for all. Everybody gets it. Everybody's like, well, that's crazy, because people are sort of going, wait a second. That's even further than, and you wonder at what point will they get to where they're like, and at what point will it be too extreme an idea? And will people even be able to realize when their ideas are too extreme? I would hope somebody would realize, having access to abortions, people, it's not just about abortions. People are losing access to family planning services and condoms and the things that they need to not get pregnant in the first place. And, the rights of rapists seem to be coming back to claim parentage. And it's all like, oh, I didn't know all this stuff was going to happen. But some people are like, yeah, that's right. Rapists are parents too. And there are some people who are so stubbornly enchanted to that stone that they're never going to realize maybe I shouldn't be so stubborn anymore. Maybe I've gone a little too far. Because otherwise we end up in a Handmaid's Tale scenario, right? And the same could happen with this healthcare thing. We don't know. And people are like, well, you can't just take people's money. What do you do about the private insurance people want to have? And what if Medicare for all is worse? And people, it's almost like sometimes people think, oh, they're just blinded to that. They don't really know what's going to happen. And so I think that sometimes you have to really, he's wondering, did these people look and really think rationally about this? Because he says, down here, I'm actually going to skip a few lines. He says, for England may keep faith for all that is done and said. It says, honestly, England says, we're going to give it back to you. They might be telling the truth. And who are we to know whether they're not? But the people who are so stubbornly opposed to the idea, maybe like the mom in Home Alone. You remember the mom in Home Alone?
Yeah.
Where she keeps buying plane tickets and hopping from plane to plane to plane to plane to get back home to her son, and she walks in, 3 minutes before her family does?
Yes.
The rest of the family comes and says, oh, we're just waiting for the plane. Because she was like, I have to get back to my son. And ended up not making a difference at all. And that's what he's saying. Maybe this right here, they all die, and literally for no reason. They would have gotten the time back anyway. So he says, for England may keep faith for all is done and said. So he's doing this weird sort of talk about martyrs. But I think that almost makes it come across as they're more martyrs because the guy who's writing the poem is being honest about his feelings about these people. And he says, when will this sacrifice be enough? When will you back off? And I think some people feel that way today, why feminism seems to be almost taking another turn backwards because people look at, I think there's, what was the whole snowflake thing that's going on right now? Or or though maybe people have problem with what's been said about the man spreading. Have you seen that? Like, guys should not sit with their legs open. Women don't have to do it. Why should men have to do it? That sort of thing. And people are like, well, that's a little extreme. Like you're talking about things that like really are almost non-issues, and we should be talking about things like rights and whether or not rapists have access to the children. That's a big deal. Like whether somebody sits with their legs open, that's a little different. I'd almost say that like mansplaining is a bigger problem than manspreading. But apparently I don't live in the city either, so I don't know what it's like to ride a subway and like what that is like. So I don't really know how manspreading affects daily life. But that's when people sometimes say is if they just had too long a sacrifice where they're complaining about everything now, and some people don't know. And I'm not saying that any of these views that I'm espousing are necessarily mine. I'm just giving you examples that I think I've seen some of you mention before so that I can provide some context. And I'm not saying that those beliefs aren't valid. I'm saying some people look at them and go, oh, that's a little extreme. It says, that is heaven's part to figure out whether or not their sacrifice is enough. He says, our only part is to murmur name upon name, as a mother names her child when sleep at last has come on limbs that had run wild. And he just means sort of like in a tender way, like the way, like when my daughter at night, she's finally calming down from like, let's say that she had like a more tantrum-like day because she didn't get a very good nap and she wakes up kind of grumpy and she just never seems to get it back. She might finally, when she's at the end of the day, finally calming down, you're like, oh, Carly, I love you so much. You just say that in sort of a tender way. And that's how he says we should say the names of the people who died for us or for our freedoms. And he says, what is it but nightfall, this thing that happened to them? No, not night, but death. And was it needless death after all? For England may keep faith for all that is done and said. And he says, we know their dream enough to know they dreamed and are dead. Like nobody dies for nothing. Like they dreamed this dream enough that they felt it was worth dying for. And he says that it's important. And he says, but what if excess of love bewildered them till they died? What if they were so married to this cause, where they loved it so much that it threw off the accuracy of their vision and they became a little over involved in it? So these are some of the people I think that I'm sure that we consider all of those like extremist terrorists, the white nationalist terrorists, the guy who went and shut up the gay nightclub. Like I don't think that gay is right. And it's like, okay, I totally get the religious belief. I'm gonna go shoot up a nightclub full of gay guys. That's a little too far, buddy. That's a little too far. It's one thing to have a belief based on a religion, another one to shoot people. And he says that what if excess of love bewildered them till they died? In some cases, it might be a valid sacrifice like this. Other cases, we might not know. Is it valid? Is it something that's too extreme? Because there is somebody out there who is going to, have the goals to assassinate Hitler. Somebody out there who might have a goal to assassinate somebody who's really not that bad, but they just can't see it because they've become so attached to that cause. And he doesn't know what the right answer is right now. And he says, regardless, I write it out in a verse. Madonic and McBride and Connolly and Paris, now and in time to be, wherever green is worn, because green is at that moment still associated with Ireland as it is now, are changed utterly. A terrible beauty is born. So Ireland used to be just a place, the goofy place where everybody gets drunk and has a good time and says nice things to each other, and now it's transformed. We have a nationality, we have something to take pride in. It's these people who died believing that we should not just be a province, but be a nation on its own. So that's that. There are questions about this one? Make sense?
Yep.
What I love about Yeats is he has a great range. Because the next poem is one of the most famous poem. It's the one most well known. Do y'all remember a few years back when there was a terrorist in Dallas who shot at police during a Black Lives Matter rally? Do y'all remember that? When Obama came and spoke in Dallas afterwards, he actually quoted a line from this poem. It's a very well-known poem. Ah, damn it. Let's make it. I think it actually worked better when I.
Line near the end.
It's actually, I think, a line near the beginning. Most of the quotable parts of this poem are actually from the beginning part, not the ending. The ending is just sort of a dark, kind of sad image of what could be to come. Yeah, usually people, when they quote, I usually see people quoting this part because it's kind of talking about abstract ideas, whereas this one is talking about a specific but strange image. So it's not often that you're going to be quoting about something about a specific strange image of a sphinx, but abstract ideas and talking about unrest and the general state of unrest and what you feel the world to be, that's applicable through almost all of time. So let me turn to this in the book. I don't think there's a whole lot of note you have to provide, but I'll still read the note that they give. Oh, come on. I think I must have skipped it. Oh, actually, yeah, there it is. So in the book, it's on page 2481. In fact, they don't even have a note. I need to get the image of the gyre up. So it says the first thing on here is turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. So I need to go over here and show you an image of what that is first. Oh, I can't remember if that's the right image or not. Hopefully it's fine. No, that's not it. That's not it. That's not it. That's not it. Where is it? No, it wasn't an Evan thing. Is this it? The gyre? Yeah, there's something about it that's missing though. In fact, let's just go through all the images. Well, I don't know. Do I want to do that? Oh wait, I think that's it. So this is the image of a gyre. It seems like it's simple, like a tornado, like you just saw. This one. So it does imply like the tornado kind of looking thing, a tornado shape, a cone. But he envisioned these cones as being, as one gets bigger, one is getting smaller within it. So it's kind of like this. And I like this sort of 3D representation. This is sort of a good 2D representation where you see one is getting to its smallest point and then it rises again, where one is rising to its greatest point. I mean, I really think that what sort of was happening here was, I actually think this is, he sort of viewed this as a way to look at history too. So, be bigger, be bigger, be bigger. Well, let me make it bigger. I'm sorry, I apologize. No bigger. Can you see that? Can you see it?
No.
Why won't I get bigger? Zoom. I don't know.
Get bigger.
Be bigger. Here, we'll just open it. Can I open it and open with Chrome? There we, oh, come on. That's not even the right image. What, this one? No, this one. No, that's another stupid one. Anyways, I can make it bigger. So, that's all I care about. See how the blue one's getting smaller, then it gets bigger. The red one is getting bigger, then it gets smaller. I think that this, in fact, the color is very appropriate right now because, well, you know, we're gonna actually. I really don't like looking at this in the black version because it's hard to see. Yeah. We're gonna open it. We'll do it live. Paint. And then I'll just do the view change. Zoom in. There we go. Much easier to see. It's actually very appropriate because it's blue and red. So I think sort of what happened here was you have, I mean, this is essentially a way he sees history. As one part of history sort of, I think, gets complacent, it sort of goes out of people's memory, and then like sort of bad extremism starts coming back, and then we go, oh crap, we're too smart for this, and we push it back down, but then it comes back again. Like, I think what happened here is, you know, Obama's elected, right? We can look at the blue and red circles here. Like, Obama's elected. Look at us, we're good people. We elected him again. Oh yeah, look at us. We're good people. We do good things. I'm talking about from the blue perspective. Let's put Clinton up. Not realizing that red has been rising in Congress, right? So the Congress during Obama's very last 2-year stint of his presidency was completely Republican. But a lot of people just look at the president as the indicator of how people are feeling. But if you look, I think both the Senate and the House of Representatives had gone completely Republican in the 2014 elections, to where they now had a majority. And I think people almost assumed, right, that Clinton was going to have the presidency. I mean, a lot of people were calling it for like early in the race, or people were like, the polling was saying, yeah, there's no chance. And everybody's sort of watching on the news is like all the states are going red for Trump. Everybody's like, that guy from The Apprentice is going to be the president? That's weird. The dude I saw like pop on the screen for a second, Home Alone 2, he's going to be the president of the United States? Weird. And what happens is sort of like, then, Trump comes, and what happens is I'm sure right now a lot of people are like, Trump comes, and then Trump gets a second term especially. Everybody goes, oh, yeah. Everything's great right now. Everything's back to like Republican ideals. But then the Republicans will get complacent and not, like right now, even the House of Representatives, how that now has a fairly sizable majority for Democrats, while the Senate still has a majority for Republicans, and Trump is still president. So what will happen eventually is probably the Senate will flip too, and then maybe when the election, I don't know if it's going to be the 2020 election or if we'll have to wait till 2024 to see it happen, but this generally happens throughout history, is eventually the party that's in power flip-flops. Because people will get fed up with whatever that party's doing, and then they'll switch to the other party. And it goes back and forth like this. And I think that Yeats' sort of idea of like people getting complacent and then not realizing what's happening, and then they start to really push, versus the other side doing the exact same thing but at opposite times, is sort of his vision of history. And I don't know if he necessarily thought about it in a political way quite the same way that I do, but I think that he could see a sense in something like, say, Hitler comes and everybody goes, oh, that's bad. Let's go the other way. Let's be really progressive and, no more racism against people. And genocide's horrible, of course. We can't be racist, but then, racism always comes back. It's just one of those things. And this is how he starts this poem, is by calling back that image. He says, turning and turning in the widening gyres. He's both using it as a concept and as an image for a tornado. The falcon cannot hear the falconers. Do you know what a falconer is? Yeah, they got the thing. You're right. You got your arm out. It's like they got that like the leather glove, and they tell the falcon what to do, and the falcon goes and he comes back. So the falcon's been told, all right, come back to me. But there's a tornado going, dude. There's so much noise, and there's so much spinning and chaos that the falcon cannot hear the falconer saying to come back. So the falcon's just out there. And he says, things fall apart. The center cannot hold, so it's turning so viciously. Has anybody seen those slow motion videos by like the slow-mo guys? Yeah. I saw one where like they threw a CD on a turn thing, like the CD turner, and then they started turning it, and it was rated for a certain RPM, and they wanted to see how high it actually could go before it broke. And so they spun it and spun it and spun it, and the CD actually, usually most things they show on that show will start to stretch, and then they'll break. But the CD was just like spin, 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 spin. And it never did anything. It all of a sudden just one moment shattered, and all the pieces went. Like, it was crazy. So at one point, the center cannot hold if it's turning fast enough for anything. There are very few things that can hold up to. There's nothing that can hold up to infinite spinning. So the harder the spinning gets, the less it can hold. He says the center cannot hold, and everything just explodes. And he says mere anarchy is loosed upon the world, which is, of course, a understatement, because anarchy is never mere. Anarchy is a big thing. It's a big idea. So anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. And this is, I think, and actually the part I think that Obama quoted was here. He said something like, "We think the times are dark. We look out at the world, we see the center cannot hold. We think the center cannot hold. And I was like, oh, I know that. That's from a poem. I haven't had to do Obama in a long time. That was really bad. And he says, the best lack all conviction while the worst are full of passionate intensity. And this is what I found to be the most quotable part of the poem for myself. Because usually what happens is when the worst people feel that they're being pushed down by the current state of things, they rise up and they start doing the worst things. So the best in those moments will lack all conviction. And I think about like the Germans in World War II, or like the Germans when Hitler started coming to power, right? They're like, that guy, he's not gonna, there's no way he could come to power. He's not really gonna do the things he says. He's just all talk and, he's all bark and no bite, this Hitler guy. And then, we start having actual genocide and like burning of people. And I mean, I hate to say this, but you can kind of parallel that today, where you see like in the border, people are being held and children separated from families. I mean, those are bad things. They just are. The question is whether or not you're holding so much to that idea that, oh yes, immigrants are bad, we need to be, but you don't realize that separating children from parents is a bad thing. That holding people in, packed cells is a bad thing. It's bad. And a lot of people like to use, extreme words to pretend like something's not happening. Like, you can't call it a concentration camp. That's insensitive to the Jews who went through that sort of thing. While there were actual Holocaust survivors who were protesting in New York saying, stop the concentration camps, talking about the southern border. So you have to, not hold yourself to the stone that he was talking about. The other thing, and realize that sometimes the best people lack all conviction, like, well, it's not that bad, or I can't do anything, or, well, at least taxes aren't high. But not realizing that there's horrible things happening somewhere, and that you don't have the passionate intensity that the angry people do. So it's one of those things that I think happens throughout history is on both sides of the political aisle is somebody will, sometimes basic freedoms will be taken on one side and sometimes the other. I'm pretty sure that everybody would, if like, for example, like if some Democrat came to power and said, yeah, we got to get rid of the military, we don't even need that. People would be like, what? Like what? But if somebody became so attached to that cause and they became so intense about it and everybody was like, oh, it's okay, everything will be fine. Like, we're never actually going to get rid of the military. And then somebody does. I was like, whoa, we weren't prepared for that. What is that all about? It's too expensive. Well, it protects us. Like, we have oceans. What are they going to do? Come over on a boat and attack us? They're never going to get all the way inland.
What are they going to do?
Well, we got coasts. Not a big deal. So I've always thought that that's one of the best, most quotable parts of the poem is that's always happens. The best, like all conviction, like, oh, I don't want to say anything because what, like if you see like a guy beating a girl in the store, they're like, well, I don't really know the situation. Maybe she hit him first. That's not the things we should think. We should step in, right? And so the worst people become full of passion and intensity until finally somebody realizes things are bad enough they need to step in. But that's the problem, is that the best of people often lacked all conviction, don't they? Like, I don't know if I should at this moment, but you should. Like, the best should be full of passion and intensity in the same way that the worst are. Maybe if there was somebody good enough, Hitler never would have got to the point that he got to. And we should prevent those sorts of things at all costs. And then he says here, and this is so funny because this is pre-World War II. He wrote this in 1919. This is before the Holocaust. This is when they just saw World War I and went, man, no man's land. That was some crap, right? Surely the second coming of Jesus is happening. Because, there's all the forecasting of the end times in the book of Revelations. They're like, things, of course, are as bad as they're ever going to get right now. Then we saw a Holocaust. Then we saw that the Americans have figured out a way to kill 250,000 people in 10 seconds. And we're like, things are way worse. Like, and then you're like, how bad can they get? I don't know. If there's one of these bombs, maybe a whole bunch of these bombs will wipe out everybody. That's probably the worst it could really get. And people are like, we thought that people fighting in, France and getting hung on barbed wire was bad. My gosh. Wiped out a whole city. And then another one later. It's insane. So you see, it's really weird. You see a change in literature. Everybody's like talking about at this point, oh my gosh, things are so bad. They can never get any worse. People stopped saying that kind of after World War II. They're like, I guess they can always get worse. Like, we had no idea. And so this is where things sort of get sort of weird, and the image he provides is I think really just meant to make you uncomfortable. He says, surely the second coming is at hand. It has to be, right? Because there's, things are so bad. The second coming. He says, hardly are those words out when a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Now, he had this is a weird thing about Yeats, okay? He sometimes was tied to mysticism. Like, he would go and see, fortune tellers, and he researched astrology, different religions. His dad was, I think, sort of anti-religious, but Yeats seemed to always be born with this sort of spirituality. It just didn't have anywhere to go. So he was constantly looking for what to believe in, and sort of built a belief system out of the general ideas that he had come to over the years that he thought made the most sense. And one thing that he strongly believed in was that there's this sort of general storehouse of images that we all have. This sort of gets passed from generation to generation. Maybe it's a cultural touchstone or whatever, but if you mention the thing he's about to mention, everybody sort of can collectively think, oh, that sounds bad. Kind of like, I don't know if there's a whole lot of cultures that are just super pro-spider, but for the most part, when you use an image of a spider, you're like, spider bad, snake bad. People get scared of those sorts of things. And he thought that the word second coming was such a big idea that people think of sort of similar ideas associated with that. If we think of a term like Antichrist, some of us can sort of get on terms with something as an Antichrist, that's bad. And we can sort of think about this image he's giving because apparently the Antichrist is going to be, I believe it says here, do they have it in the notes? Christ's second coming is heralded by the coming of the beast of the apocalypse, or Antichrist. So before Christ comes, the Antichrist has to come. So things have to get super, super, super bad before Christ says, what's up? That's probably his first words, I think. Trumpets. And then, what's up? What if Jesus was like, oh, I should have, the wrong words. I should have said something else. I thought, he comes up later and he's like, so in which case was he right? Because Jesus is perfect, right? Which case is Jesus right? When he had the first thought of the second. We don't really have a whole lot of internal dialogue from Jesus from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We don't have a whole lot of him going, oh, I shouldn't have said that. He just always seems super duper confident. Anyways.
Yeah, that Jesus guy.
But he couldn't have been a perfect carpenter, right? He must have. I don't know. So that means he never lost confidence in his carpentry either, or maybe I shouldn't have. Oh, I missed, or I don't know something.
He hit his thumb.
He had to have hit his thumb once with a hammer and went, oh, that is painful.
Or maybe did he?
Because he wouldn't have cursed. He would. Oh, that is unfortunate.
Or hit,
I should not have hit myself in the. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe every swing was perfect. Who knows? So. This is the image that troubles his sight. He starts to think of what would an image of the Antichrist look like, and so he calls upon an image almost all of us know of because it's widely forecast in the world enough at this point. Even without the internet, without television, people have heard of the Sphinx. Right? There's that big desert lion with the head of a man in Egypt that people know about. It's one of the wonders of the world, I think, at that point, isn't it? So. It kind of reminds me almost, if anybody's ever seen the movie Ghostbusters 2, not a lot have, but they coat the internal of the Statue of Liberty with slime, this weird slime, and it starts to cause the Statue of Liberty where it can move. So it's this giant, thing that we consider just a wonder of the world starts moving. We're like, oh, that's a sign of the end times. That, if that just started happening, it'd be like, oh, this is bad. This is supposed to be not even make sense. Or you'd think you were dreaming and you'd pinch yourself, because there's just no way. And so he says, somewhere in sands of desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs. So it's big, large, lumbering movement. It's going to start slowly inching, while all about it real shadows of the indignant desert birds. So like they were just chilling on the Sphinx, and all of a sudden things starts moving. They're like, caw, caw, what the hell? The darkness drops again. And he says, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast its hour come round at last slouches toward Bethlehem to be born. Because I think that's part of it as well, that the Antichrist is also born in Bethlehem. I might be wrong about that, but that's what it almost sounds like here. Is that it says that we all became sort of complacent in the time since Jesus' death, that now a rocking cradle is coming to bear the Antichrist, and everything's sort of going to it, to sort of bow to it. And he says, what will this beast be that is even greater and more horrible than something like a Sphinx that is on its way to just be there for the birth? This is awful. And I think, in a sense, he was sort of right. He's like, what rough beast, its hour come round at last? He could have been talking about Hitler, right? Hitler's the one that came and had the Holocaust. But then what happened? No Jesus. There was like things got really bad. There was a genocide. And then no Jesus. So things could definitely get worse. And according to religious stuff, it probably will. Terrifying. When will nuclear holocaust be? And weirdly, I was thinking the same phrase. I don't know why, but mark it on the calendar. I don't know why it can't occur to me too. I was like, I can't say that. And you said it. And I was like, weird. He was like, what? I was like, whoa. He was like, what? Whoa.
Whoa.
I think that was a Finding Nemo quote, roughly translated. Next is, any questions about this one, the second coming? Does it make more sense now that I explain it?
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people got like the feeling of it no matter what. Like feeling. Crap's bad, yeah. Like that's basically. And then sailing to Byzantium is one that's kind of always given me a little problem. In compared to the other two, but I think I'm finally starting to get it over the years. Still don't have it. What's up with Bartleby? Oh, I think, is Yeats still under copyright? He shouldn't be.
Hey, when did the Empire collapse?
What?
Well, when the Byzantine Empire collapsed. You're going back in time.
This one's always a shorter poem than I remember. I think it's just because I spend so much time trying to understand it. So sailing to Byzantium, and it says down here at the bottom, Yeats wrote in a book called A Vision. He said, I think that if I could be given a month of antiquity, ancient times, and leave to spend it where I chose, I would spend it in, kind of like if I could time travel to any point in history and spend a month. He's like, I would spend it in Byzantium, now called Istanbul, a little before Justinian opened St. Sophia and closed the Academy of Plato. So around the 6th century CE. He says, I think that in early Byzantium, maybe never before or since in recorded history, religious, aesthetic, and practical life were one, that architect and artificers spoke to the multitude and the few alike. The painter, the mosaic worker, the worker in gold and silver, the illuminator of sacred books were almost impersonal, almost perhaps without the consciousness of individual design absorbed in their subject matter, and that the vision of a whole people. I almost think of like, have y'all ever been to, has anybody had a chance to go to New Mexico before? No? Well, I went to New Mexico and I went to like Albuquerque. Albuquerque looks just like any other place. So like some people have got like the New Mexico sort of building design, but like you go by McDonald's and McDonald's look just like McDonald's here. You go by the Quiznos or Chick-fil-A, it looks just like here. But if you go up to Santa Fe has this thing where they've sort of forced all people who build anything in the city that's new to follow these particular building designs. So if you see a McDonald's, it sort of looks like it's got like, you know, the stucco, you know, designs on the outside, or I don't know what you call that, but like the, you know, there's the style of Mexican housing, like from Mexico, with like the wooden beams sticking out of the side and like the clay roof. What do they call? I don't know what they call that clay roofing, but it's like, you know, the half pipes of like clay that like are not next to each other. The red clay roof. And almost like even a McDonald's will have sort of that style, which is sort of weird, but it gives this sort of interesting, when you look at every place in the city has this sort of set beauty to it, or like everybody's houses sort of look the same, and it sort of like looks like the whole city is sort of together on that, like the design of it. And I think that that's sort of what he's talking about with Byzantium. Instead of seeing this loose conglomeration of just unrelated things, everything sort of looks like it's meant to be done like together, like everybody had the same purpose together. And there wasn't really a need to, I guess, argue about art and architecture and poetry, because everybody just sort of by chance had the exact same vision for where they should go at the exact same time. So that the lowest of the low, people who couldn't read, couldn't write, had no interest in art, and the people who had the highest artistic desires all had the exact same desires at the same time. Now, we don't have quite that right now. Like if you take a look at, I mean, the Avengers films are doing very well, right? So you think, oh, everybody likes the Avengers. Not really. I mean, if you look at what wins the Oscar every year, right? So the people who are giving out the Oscars, they're not going to go to the Avengers films. There was a time, like say in the 90s, usually the most popular films when everybody was seeing, it was like, man, what was the best movie you saw last year? Forrest Gump. That movie is so good. Oh, look, it won the Oscar for Best Picture. What movie did you like? Oh, I love Titanic. That movie was so good. Oh, Titanic won the Oscar for Best Picture. Now everybody's like, man, that movie was really good. What movie? Oh, Black Panther. Loved it. And like, what wins the, Best Picture? And it was like some movie nobody's seen.
Yeah.
And that's what seems to happen like for the last 10, 15 years is it's always some movie that nobody saw. And the only way you could get a copy was on home video or going into Dallas and seeing it at the Angelica when it ran for its 2 weeks. It was like the only way to even see those movies. And like, so now there's like a huge divide between what high art thinks is good and what normal people actually want to see. And he was saying in Byzantium, it wasn't like that. Everybody had the same vision. Young, old, black, white.
Brown.
Yeah, I was like, what's in between? I was like, what's the respectable term for in between? But yeah, I saw Ovi on. Huh? I mean, like, I can't go around and say like, like if I'm doing a descriptor for people, right? I can say like, if somebody says like, I don't know why, I've noticed other people are very terrible at explaining what people look like. Like I asked somebody the other day, okay, what does he look like? Because I was trying to figure out a guy that goes to our church. They said, he's old. Is that it? Like, is that all you've got? Okay, here, I'm actually going to...
Marker?
Huh?
Marker?
No, I'm going to try to do something. I thought about doing this the other night, but I don't know how necessary it is right now. Yeah, we'll put a marker. Was to say that everybody in that society at that time had the exact same goal. There were no, like, little eccentricities. It was like everybody was geared toward the exact same thing and had the exact same artistic and aesthetic and architectural beliefs all at the same time. I think sort of like the way we think about... I think of like the early American like architecture when you see like people like Thomas Jefferson wanted like colleges to have that sort of Greek look where it looked like say the Colosseum or something, or the Parthenon, where it had those big marble, like they weren't really marble but had that look, and then you had like all the paintings were sort of that Renaissance style Rembrandt type painting. I might not be right with when I say Renaissance, but like Rembrandt style, where it's like sort of like really great lighting and like realism, but like a definite oil look to it. I don't know. Anyways, I'm getting a little off on like the art stuff here, and it's taking forever to get to an actual point. So let's talk about sailing to Byzantium. He would love to go back to a place like that. And why? Because he starts out and says, that is no country for old men. He means the one that he's in right now, currently. The young in one another's arms, birds in the trees, those dying generations at their song. The salmon falls, the mackerel crowded seas, fish, flesh, or fowl commend all summer long what is begotten, born, and dies. Caught in that sensual music, all neglect monuments of unaging intellect. I would say he's sort of complaining about, oh, y'all. He's essentially complaining about what, I don't know, probably pretty specific to most of you actually. Like you're all into like the meme that's the meme right now, and you're done with it as soon as it's gone. So like you're caught up in the thing that's alive at the moment. I mean, it's almost a hyper-realized version of what he's talking about. Like, I mean, he's talking about like people who are really into what's young and fresh at the moment, like whatever styles are in or whatever. But people who are sort of neglecting monuments of unaging intellect. Like I'm sort of presenting to you every class monuments of unaging intellect. You know, established works of literature that have persisted throughout many, many, many years. But I'm sure you'll much rather watch some random YouTube video of somebody doing a Let's Play or talking about how to do makeup. Probably you do spend your time doing other sorts of things sometimes instead of doing the work that I have. Not looking at this and going, wow, this has thought for future years. This has food that will last my soul. You're like, this is crap I have to do for school. The real love is buying or that. So, have you ever heard of somebody who's on the right side of history? Have you ever heard of that? One of the things that people have said about, like I just happened to, I read some articles the other night because they had like the Democratic National, not committee, what do they call it? CNN was doing some Democrat debates and some articles came out this morning and they popped up on my feed. In fact, I probably have one right now. Literally none. Like nothing has been published this morning apparently while I've been in class. So Bernie Sanders is one of those people that has always been on the right side of history. Like I saw an article one time where somebody tried to claim that he was like a racist in the 60s because they found a picture of him angry at a MLK rally, but it was because he was marching with Martin Luther King. Like even when he was in his 20s, he knew what the right thing was regarding racism. And he's been along for the ride with every single one of the positive progressive movements. However, people point out people like, say, Joe Biden, who voted against gay marriage. Bernie Sanders was always for gay marriage, always. In fact, every single time there's been a thing that we now consider to be a basic civil right, Bernie Sanders has been on the side of that civil right. Weirdly enough, Bernie Sanders is even on the side of gun ownership, which a lot of people don't know. They assume, he's a Democrat, he's anti-gun. But he says it's right there in the Constitution. It says gun ownership, right to bear arms. We can't take that away. Which a lot of people find that, but he's always been on the right side of history. And I think that he's one of those people that has always sort of, I think, he has always looked at monuments of unaging intellect. He's looked at what will persist throughout time. Will people later down the line, will people centuries from now say, these people did the right thing? And he looked and he said this, like racism is bad. And he just knew. And I think that you have to think outside of this moment. What is it that's good for me right now? And think, what will people centuries now, what will our legacy be? And the guy in this poem is saying, I want to be involved in the monuments of unaging intellect. I don't want to be the one who's sitting here making memes. He's like, I don't want to be an 80-year-old meme lord. I literally don't even know what a meme lord is. I just said it. It could be nothing. I don't. So he says, I got to get out of here. I got to get away from the memes. I got to go somewhere else. And he starts talking about old age and sort of what old age does to you here in stanza 2. And it's some of the best language I've ever heard about an old person. He just gets the images down so well. Listen to these images. He says, an aged man is but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick. If you think about an old person, you ever seen somebody who's really, really old, and they're like, I went to the doctor's office the other day, and I was thinking about how I am right now, and I have very few health problems. Like my knees have been swelling. My right knee has been swelling up the last couple of days. I think from sitting in the grading chair too long. And like I can feel like there's fluid in my knees. I'm 36 years old. I shouldn't have fluid in my knees. My dad has bad knees, so I'm gonna have it too. But I see these like old people. I can walk across the room like this, right? That's all I can do. This is me. This is how I do. What? What now? No. Whereas the old people, or like, you know, some of them were coming in there to the doctor's office and they were just like super thin and they had the skin like paper and they're just, you know, walking across. I'm thinking, man, how will I be able to stand taking that long to go somewhere? Because I'm a real like fast moving kind of guy usually. But you just sort of, like, it's how you feel, I guess, at that point where like your bones are a stick and your skin is merely a tattered coat draped around it. And that's what you feel like you've become at some point in your life. And I was like, oh, wow, that's a really good image of it. He says here, however, unless soul clap its hands and sing, and louder sing for every tatter in its mortal dress. So he says, yes, you are nothing but a tattered coat upon a stick, unless your soul claps its hands and starts singing like in praise of the wrinkles. In fact, yeah, every daggum tatter. That's my tatter. So you have to like sort of become above it, and then you like have this energy to you. And he says, nor is there singing school, but studying monuments of its own magnificence. And it's like literally looking at and having pride in oneself. Yeats is one of those where like, and you'll see from Auden later, he says Yeats's gift survived it all. He was a good poet in his youth. He was a great poet in old age. He never lost it. Some people lost it, and he never did. He always just got it. And he says, so there is no singing school but studying monuments of his own magnificence. He says he needs more. He says, therefore I have sailed the seas and come to the holy city of Byzantium. So he's back to Byzantium now. And now he's sort of talking to the muses, I guess, when he gets there. Because imagine you get there, and his vision of Byzantium is, you know, you arrive, and imagine like everybody imagines like they go to heaven or whatever, and they meet, you know, certain people in heaven. They're often famous people, not necessarily just your family. But imagine he arrives in Byzantium, and they're like, oh look, there's, you know, Apollo, Hercules, Achilles. They're all just chilling next to each other. You know, it's like all the greats are there, and they're involved in stuff together. And I think that's sort of how he imagines it, like everybody who is capable. And so the sage is standing in God's holy fire, is in the gold mosaic of a wall. He says, come from the holy fire. So this piece of artwork he once saw, he said, Pernigire, and be the singing masters of my soul. So he's essentially asking the art to sing through him so that he can take its message and sort of be a part of it as well. He wants to add to this purpose of Byzantium. He says, consume my heart away. He's just so good at talking. It's a very simple phrase, consume my heart away. But it's actually literally, I want the city and its artistic goals to take my heart and just consume it and make it a part of your purpose. Sick with desire and fastened to a dying animal. Do y'all realize how great good that is? We're all that. We're just fastened to a dying animal. I know you feel invincible now, but you'll die. We all will. Some sooner than others. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news. You don't know who that is yet. But it says, fastened to a dying animal, it knows not what it is, and gather me into the artifice of eternity. So he wants to become something eternal, something that isn't just in this world for a little while. And he says, once I'm out of nature, once I'm more than just a mere body, I shall never take my bodily form from any natural thing, but such a form as Grecian goldsmiths make of hammered gold and gold enameling. I can't remember who said it, but somebody was talking about, oh, he's an animal. It might have been Jess. Were you the one talking about this? Where like he was talking about how he wanted to be an animal? Yeah. But he says, like, I want to be an animal, but he's not really talking about a real animal. He's talking about, he says, I don't want my form from any natural thing. He's like, I want you to like essentially make me into like a golden bird. Have you ever seen those weird mechanical birds? Yeah. I saw a video one time. It was like some mechanical bird from like the 16th century where somebody made like these intricate gears or something inside of this tiny metal bird. And if you turned a key, the bird would start. It looked like a legit bird going. Like it was like, what? Let me see if I can find that little YouTube. It's crazy. What was it called? What do you call the thing? Antique
Bird.
bird
Mechanical bird.
mechanical.
Keywords.
Oh, I think this might be it, or one of them.
What was the viewpoint on that? The one that.
Antique singing bird pistol. And it's the only pair of known matching ones. Oh gosh. Okay, this whole presentation video.
One of the most amazing mechanical works of art, amongst the most precious objects for any collector of fine works of art. They were made for museums.
It was made for a purpose, and it's really cool. Come on.
And were special.
Show me what it does. Let's see it. Okay, there we go. Go ahead.
Which is
Go ahead.
any objects, in making any object incorporating music, automaton, and in particular singing birds. The mechanism, which is composed of several hundreds of screws, wheels, levers, is an ingenious masterwork where every piece has its specific position and is pushing the bird out of the barrel the minute you activate it. And on a small pin, the bird is flipping upwards to sit on the barrel, and then within that tube, all the commands for its wings, the tail, and the beak are activated. Some of the bird.
Like, I just think that's insane. That somebody was so good at like artistry back then and like mechanical stuff that they like built this just for some like rich person, like some king or something. Yeah, and it's like that big. Like the little, it's like it holds in your hand that little bird like, and so he wants to like essentially like Yeats is talking about, make me into something like that, like this permanent and beautiful work of art that only exists as this one sort of thing that nobody else knows. He says, such a form as Grecian goldsmiths make of hammered gold and gold enameling to keep a drowsy emperor awake. That's exactly what that would be for, right? Yeah. Like, oh my gosh, I'm falling asleep. Oh, but sir, someone hath come for a gift to you. Yes, what is it? Is that a bird and a gun? Tis delightful. And he's saying, like, make me that, but like in a more permanent, eternal form of art. Like, I want to be the bird that keeps the emperor awake. Yeah.
It was sold for $5 million, like one like that.
Jeez. Guess who's getting out of the shoe business? I'm just kidding. I gotta go find one of these guns with the birds inside. Bird gun. You're gonna like change your like handle now to like bird gun seller. No, not that kind of bird gun. So it says, and so he says, or set upon a golden bough to sing to lords and ladies of Byzantium of what is past or passing or to come. So he wants to become this thing out of nature, out of time, that is sort of built for this purpose. And he uses the bird specifically because he wants to sing on a bough to the lords and ladies of Byzantium. Everybody who comes along, everybody who sees the bird, hears that bird sing. And what do they hear it sing? Of what is past or passing or to come. And if you look at the second coming, I think he succeeded. Because if you look at the second coming, it's sort of an eternal poem. Like that poem will essentially work, I guess, until Jesus comes and like the earth gets destroyed or something. Like that poem's gonna last because there's always gonna be bad people doing bad things and things getting so bad that people wonder, oh my gosh, is Jesus coming? There's always gonna last, and those images that he has will work forever. And I think he more or less succeeded in becoming that bird. He is the bird that lasts forever, the bird of words that sings to us of what is past, Easter rising, what is passing. Right now, I've already used the example of like what's going on at the border, or to come, like what are bad things that will come in the future if we don't take a handle of this now. He sings of all of those things. And I don't really have time, I don't think, to talk about Under bin Bulben because it's a little longer and way more confusing, but it's sort of his last poem that sort of sums up to him, like, it's a more complicated poem about Ireland and talks about specific painters and specific artists, and he uses this image of a witch, which I think will take even longer to explain to a more Christian audience, or people at least who are either atheist or Christian or some other Christian adjacent religion, which has like a god and it's very clear, but this witch of Atlas would take too long to explain. So he's talking about Ireland, Ireland's history, and the people of Ireland. The most important thing I think that you need to listen here to is essentially his epitaph, the thing that was on his grave. He wrote himself, and it appears in the very last line, talking about himself. He sort of closes out talking about Ireland, and then he closes out by talking about his own burial place where he will be buried. And he says, under Bear Ben Bulben's head, so it's the name of a mountain there where he lived, in Sligo, I guess. In Drumcliff Churchyard, Yeats is laid. An ancestor was rector there long years ago, so he's got a little bit of history in there. A church stands near by the road, an ancient cross, no marble, no conventional phrase, on limestone quarried near the spot. See, he even he makes sure that he lets people know, I want my tombstone to be made of limestone quarried in Ireland. So he wants it very close by. He wants even the stone to come from. It'd be like asking somebody to create your grave or your memory stuff only out of stuff that was local to where you were from because you found that important. And he says, by his command these words are cut, cast a cold eye on life, on death, horsemen pass by. So he's like, I'd rather not be taken out of this world forever. I'd rather stay, at least in memory, to continue to inspire, or at least be a part of this world, at least in memory. And Auden would say later in the next couple, the next week, I think we talked about it, he'll say that he succeeded. So we're going to talk about James Joyce's The Dead. There's only a few things I like to talk about when it comes to James Joyce's The Dead. Usually what I end up doing is reading a couple selections because they're very important, and I think just reading them helps make sense of the whole thing. Do you have any questions about Byzantium? Did y'all find Yeats interesting? I find his poetry to be just really intriguing. And it's very interesting to me that somebody who is using modern language still comes up with images and the way to put words together that are so lasting. Fastened to a dying animal. That's what your soul is. Interesting way of putting it. And that will last as well. So let's see. We have, Gabriel's at the party. The whole time he's worried about what? Giving this speech. Right? That's his main worry. Miss Ivers comes up and accuses him of not being Irish enough. She says, you're a West Briton. Be like somebody calling you a South Canadian. I imagine you could call a Democrat that, right? You're like, you're such a South Canadian. You're not even American. I am not. I found that you searched on Google best way to go to Canada when Trump was elected. Shut up. Be the kind of thing that would say something about. And she's accusing him, why don't you learn more about your own country? You have Ireland as a country. And he's like, shut up, Mrs. Ivers. And he feels like he sort of loses that battle. Because he says he's going to France or Belgium or Germany. And she's like, why don't you go to damn Ireland where you're from, and go tour there? And then people are trying to get Mr. Darcy to sing because he's the actual tenor who's there. And instead, the old ladies who were there, they sing, his aunts. And it's just this whole very light party atmosphere, isn't it? It's like you're at a little house gathering, like at the holiday times, because it is Christmas time. And so, that sounds perfectly normal, right? It doesn't seem like, were y'all taken in by the drama of it in the beginning?
No.
It just sort of seemed like, there's a whole lot of stuff happening. It's like a party, and I don't really get what I'm supposed to be watching. It doesn't seem to have anything to offer me. That's how I felt usually. Most times I read this, and I get to the speech, and I'm like, okay, this is where we're going, so I need to pay a lot of attention to the speech, and I always do. And so that's why I'll spend a lot of time now. So he happens to notice a little ways in that Mrs. Ivers is no longer there. She left before his speech, and he thought that she was going to be giving him dirty looks the whole time, so he's lucked out there. But that hasn't happened quite yet. So I'm going to give you the whole speech that Gabriel gives, and then I'm also going to read a little bit from the later part of the poem. Or not poem, but story, I'm sorry. He says, I'll probably try to do it in a very guy giving a speech at a Christmas party type voice.
You gotta say a lot of uhs.
Oh yeah, ding 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 on the glass or something. Ladies and gentlemen, And everybody knows his speech is coming. It's something that they had prepared for. They're like, oh, yeah, he's giving the speech tonight. And I guess that was a thing they used to do, was give a speech at a party because there was no phones and no TV. So that was like the entertainment. It has fallen to my lot this evening, as in years past, to perform a very pleasing task, but a task for which I'm afraid my poor powers as a speaker are all too inadequate. Typical speaker, humble thing. Like, oh, there's no way I could possibly do a good job at this. And they're like, oh, no, you're great. And he's like, oh, no. No, but really. Yeah, and the guy says, no. Full of crap, of course you are. And he says, but however that may be, I can only ask you tonight to take the will for the deed and to lend me your attention for a few moments while I endeavor to express to you in words what my feelings are on this occasion. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not the first time that we have gathered together under this hospitable roof, around this hospitable board, talking about the table. You ever heard of room and board? You ever heard of that before? Like a college has like room and board costs. When it says room and board, the room is the place you stay. The board is the food, because the board used to be you say like board a table, and that's where the food is. So that's why it's room and board. Even though you're staying in a dorm, not in somebody's house. It is not the first time that we have been the recipients, or perhaps I had better say the victims, of the hospitality of certain good ladies. And here he pointed at his Aunt Kate and Aunt Julia, Mary Jane. They were like, oh, you're so... Because they hosted the party, and they feel now very delighted that somebody has mentioned that they hosted the party and said, oh, they're just so hospitable that we're like not the recipients, but the victims of their hospitality, right? I don't know what this is. I feel more strongly with every recurring year that our country has no tradition which does it so much honor and which it should guard so jealously as that of its hospitality. I was like, hey, that kind of reminds me of Texas a little bit, right? I mean, something like, be nice to people, and like the whole, considerate, and what is it? Like, open the doors for people, and you stop at a stop sign. Sometimes a guy will wave you on. He's like, no, you go first. No, you go first. And sometimes you have like old man battles where they're both trying to wave each other on. And like they'll get out and fight over who goes first. Literally, like, you were supposed to go. No, you go. Yeah, it almost feels like Canadian in a sense. He says, it is a tradition that is unique as far as my experience goes, and I have visited not a few places abroad among the modern nations. Some would say, perhaps, that with us it is rather a failing than anything to be boasted of. But granted, even that, it is to my mind a princely failing, and one that I trust will long be cultivated among us. Of one thing at least I am sure, as long as this one roof shelters the good ladies aforesaid, and I wish from my heart it may do so for many and many a young year to come, the tradition of genuine, warm-hearted, courteous Irish hospitality, which our forefathers have handed down to us, and which we in turn must hand down to our descendants, is still alive among us. And everybody's like, oh, yeah, good, you're damn right. Irish hospitality, good thing. Yes, we need that. And then he realized Miss Ivers wasn't there, the lady who he had the argument with earlier about Ireland and how you need to go back to Ireland, blah, blah, blah. That he's like, awesome. So now I can even say the parts that I was worried she would have a problem with. He said, ladies and gentlemen, a new generation is growing up in our midst. A generation actuated by new ideas and new principles. It is serious and enthusiastic for these new ideas, and its enthusiasm, even when it is misdirected, is, I believe, in the main sincere. But we are living in a skeptical and, if I may use the phrase, a thought-tormented age. And sometimes I fear that this new generation, educated or hyper-educated as it is, will lack those qualities of humanity, of hospitality, of kindly humor, which belong to an older day. And I always point out this quote. I think it's very important to point this out. Like that, he says that they're living in a time when people are almost tormented by broad thought, like education. That they're not as hospitable and humane anymore. They're more cold and unthinking and scientific, and they don't think about like thoughts and feelings and sorts of things like that. He says, listening tonight to the names of all those great singers of the past, it seemed to me, I must confess, that we were living in a less spacious age. Those days might, without exaggeration, be called spacious days. And if they are gone beyond recall, well, let us hope at least that in gatherings such as this we shall still speak of them with pride and affection, still cherish in our hearts the memory of those dead and gone great ones whose fame the world will not willingly let die. Hear, hear, said Mr. Brown loudly. But yet, continued Gabriel, his voice falling into a softer inflection, there are always in gatherings such as this sadder thoughts that will recur to our minds, thoughts of the past, of youth, of changes, of absent faces that we miss here tonight. Our path through life is strewn with many such sad memories, and were we to brood upon them always, we could not find the heart to go on bravely with our work among the living. We have all of us living duties and living affections which claim, and rightly claim, our strenuous endeavors. It's just coughing. Therefore, I will not linger on the past. So that's sort of his conclusion here. He says we're in the thought-tormented age. We need to focus on hospitality. And then he says here that we often get our minds wrapped up in the past. We focus on those who are gone, those who we've left behind, those whose lives have changed and they're no longer with us or they've just left us. And he says, but we have things to attend to right now that should take our attentions. And so we should be paying attention to those things. So he says, I will not linger on the past. So that is the ultimate conclusion that he has of his speech there. And then he sort of goes off after that and talks about his aunts and how hospitable they are. He says here, I will not let any gloomy moralizing intrude upon us here tonight. Here we are gathered together for a brief moment from the bustle and rush of our everyday routine. We are met here as friends in the spirit of good fellowship, as colleagues, also to a certain extent in the true spirit of camaraderie, and as the guests of, what shall I call them, the three graces of the Dublin musical world. And everybody, is like basically cheering because the couple aunts and and Mary Jane, they are, of course, the hosts of the party, and they're singers, and they provided some musical entertainment as well. So they said, everybody's sort of cheering for them because he's making a statement about them. And it says the table burst into applause and laughter at this sally. Aunt Julia vainly asked each of her neighbors in turn to tell her what Gabriel had said. What did he say? What did Gabriel say? What did he say? He says we're the three graces, Aunt Julia. Okay, I don't know. What the hell? So she's so old that she can't really hear, doesn't really know what's going on, and says what? So she has trouble even taking the compliment in the way that it's meant. Probably doesn't know what he means by the three graces anyway. So he then says some stuff about I will not attempt to play tonight. The part that Paris played where he had to choose between three women and say which one was most beautiful. He says, let's just toast them. And they say, rare jolly fellows for the nobody tell, can't deny. You've heard that before, right? He's a jolly fellow for he's a jolly. Yeah. And then everybody starts to leave the party. Everybody's leaving. And then at a certain point, Gabriel's like, where'd my wife go? So he starts looking around and this is after he's had the speech, which essentially was against Mrs. Ivers and what she was saying. She was saying, come back to your homeland, come back to the past, find your roots, explore them. He's like, no, I go to France, I go to Belgium on bicycling tours. I don't go back home. I mean, that's the past. So he tells basically the whole party, we should not linger on the past, we should look for what's to come. And he was afraid Miss Ivers was going to disagree with him on that, but she wasn't there, so he's like, okay, finally, this is great. But he looks, and there's this moment where I've always thought about it in sort of a visual way. Let me get one of these new markers y'all got me. Let's go with this one. So I've always thought, like, here's Gabriel, and he's standing, and he sees his wife, and he looks up the stairs. Let's give him like a little, pretentious top hat. He's not Abraham Lincoln, so we're going to take away that part. So he looks up the stairs, and here's the stairs. They're right there. And I've always liked to think of this as they go up, and then the stairs that they continue to go up to they're behind a wall though, so you can only see that far. So there's like a little, railing, and his wife is looking up with one hand on the railing, and she's She's looking up, listening, but not really with a smile on her face. I intended to draw a line, it just didn't come out right. I didn't really draw a frown either. I don't know why I can't do this. So she looks up, and then up here in like some room, which you can't see from downstairs, Mr. Darcy is singing along with the piano. Somebody finally got him to sing. He was saying he was sick and he wasn't going to sing, but now he's singing just one song, and he's like, la, and she hears it come down, la. So that's sort of the scene as I've always saw it, is that the frame is already there with her, and then he walks into the frame, and that's what's just sort of happening. And the song that she hears, or the bit of the song she hears, is this song, and it's this little last part. So it's this part of the song. So this is where he walks up and he hears this. And that's how we're told in the story that has been heard, is that bit right there. But if you look through the rest of the song is, if you'll be the lass of Aughrim as I take it you mean to be, tell me the first token that passed between you and me. So let's go back to the first time that we had it. He says, oh, don't you remember that night on yon lowly hill? When we both met together, I'm sorry now to tell. He sounds like he's talking about a story about a love he's about to have. But when you listen, it says, they met together, and he says, I'm sorry now to tell. Oh, the rain falls on my heavy locks, and the dew wets my skin. My babe lies cold within my arms, and none will let us in. It sort of mirrors the Virgin Mary scenario, where like they needed a place for Jesus to stay. And so this is not quite that. She's like his girl, and they need to get inside because it's too cold outside, and his hair is wet and cold, and she's wet and colder than he is, and so he's trying to keep her warm. And I think it's the implication from the song is that she dies. And so that's the song that she hears being sung by Mr. Darcy, who's a very capable tenor. And this is the only version I could find where somebody sang it quite as sad as I have always envisioned it. But also from like a distance, like a sound of it. Almost everybody sings it very light and bright and happy. And I'm like, what is this song about? Somebody dying? Like, I don't understand why they sing it that way. So he hears this, and it sort of doesn't deter him. He just thinks, oh, my wife is so beautiful standing there. And he's in a good mood. He's in a great mood. And so they go back to their hotel room, and you've been in a good mood before, right? I'm not going to continue with that thought. So he's in a good mood, and what that good mood does to him is makes him very, he's very...
Yeah. Hyperactive.
He's like in a great mood, and he wants to make love with his wife. He's like, I feel good, you feel good, we just went to the party, let's take the party home, I guess. Let's feel great together. I did a great job with the speech, and you're proud of me, and I'm proud of me. So we had a good time. So he says, let's just cap the night off in a wonderful way, and we'll make love, and then like it'll be like the perfect day, basically. But he is not as attentive as a husband in that moment as he should be, because he's so into the fact that he just gave a great speech that he says, Greta, dear, what are you thinking about? Tell me what it is, Greta. I think I know what is the matter. Do I know? And then she said in an outburst of tears, oh, I am thinking about that song, The Lass of Aughrim. And she broke loose and started crying. He just asked the following questions like he would, like, what about the song? Why does that make you cry? He says, why? And she says, I was thinking about a person long ago who used to sing that song. And who was the person long ago? I think he thinks, honestly, it might have been him. Like, yeah, I might have sung the song once. And she says, it was a person I used to know in Galway when I was living with my grandmother. And he's, like, getting kind of pissed because he's like, this doesn't sound like me at all. He says, someone you were in love with? She says, it was a young boy I used to know named Michael Fury. He used to sing that song, The Lass of Aughrim. He was very delicate. She says, I can see him so plainly. Such eyes as he had, such big dark eyes. And he says, oh, then you were in love with him. I used to go out walking with him when I was in Galway. And perhaps that was why you wanted to go to Galway with that Ivers girl. Because remember, Ivers had said, well, you should come to Galway. And he goes, well, maybe you should go back there. Like he's being like, like he's like, oh, maybe you should blah, blah, blah. If you love him so much, why don't you marry him, kind of that little thing. What did you say?
I'm jealous.
Oh, yeah, it's just jealous. Because maybe that's why you want to go back to Galway with the Irish girl. She says, she seems confused. She's like, what for? He says, how do I know? To see him, perhaps. And she looks kind of just goes, oh, no, he's dead. He died when he was only 17. Isn't that a terrible thing to die so young as that? And he says, what was he? And he was in the gas works. I think he meant like what was his job. And he says he feels humiliated now because he was thinking, oh, we're going to have some sex. And instead, she's all sad about some dude that's not him. And it's sort of pissing him off. I love the honesty here because it's one of those, it's a weird thing. Like when you in marriage, you know the person so well usually. And you become so honest with each other over the years. When you're in a relationship now, you're lying to each other. Whether you know you are or not, you're lying to that person. It's just that you are. You're sort of like always. I was thinking about this the other night when I was thinking about this story. There are two types of honesty. There's honesty of mind and honesty of heart. Sometimes you'll be dishonest with reality because you're trying to do so for the sake of being honest with your heart. If somebody says like, does this dress make me look fat? And you say, no, you look beautiful. And you might honestly in your mind think, if you really thought about it, and it wasn't your wife you're looking at, it was somebody, just random person who was wearing that same dress the same way, you'd be like, well, that does make them look overweight. But the love is coming through here, and the way you feel is more honest than reality. So it may, to any objective observer, actually make that person look overweight, but to you, they just look beautiful, and that's what you're communicating. Or it's like you're telling a story. It's like, oh, this is like that time this happened to me. Have I told you this before? And you might know, yes, I've heard this story before. I've heard it a million times, and I'm kind of done hearing it. And that might be like in the mind what you might truly say if it was anybody else. But instead, it's the person that you love, and you're like, I think maybe, but go ahead and tell it again. I'll stop you if I've heard it. But you know you've heard it. But it's like you love the person. You want to hear him talk. And I think that's sort of like weird because he's being honest in his thoughts here. The writer is, and I think it's very hard to pinpoint honesty of thought because a lot of people read this and you feel about Gabriel at the end. You're like, man, he's a jerk. But he's just being honest about this guy's actual thoughts. And he actually sounds like he's made an actual change, a significant change in his thoughts at the end, which is, I think, all the more significant because of how he feels now. And he says, I suppose you were in love with this Michael Fury, Greta. She says, I was great with him at that time. And he says, and what did he die of so young, Greta? Consumption, was it? And she just kind of looks and says, I think he died for me. And it's like, oh my gosh, talk about taking the wind out of your sails. No sex now.
Oh.
That's what he's thinking. He's like, that's his very selfish thought. And this happens sometimes, like, not like that particular thought, but like let's say this has happened on both of our birthdays actually.
Oh.
Like when my wife and I will have like a birthday, and the other one will end up being sick. And we were gonna like go and have a fun time, like go to like the movies or something, and then go out and eat. But the other one's sick, and you're sort of like, oh, I feel bad that the other one's sick. But you're also kind of pissed because that was supposed to be your fun day.
Yeah.
You're like, and you want to be pissed at them, but you can't because it's not their fault they're sick. But then you're thinking, are they faking it? Do they really not want to? But you're like, I don't really, what's going on? But it's like you want to be pissed, but you don't have anything to be pissed at, and it makes you angry. And that's sort of it's such an honest thought that he has here. He's like, some guy died for her, and I'm pissed that right now this isn't going my way. And she says, poor fellow. And she said, so what happens basically, it's told, is that she's about to go off to like, what is it, convent nun school or whatever. She's about to go off to school again, and he's getting very sickly. He's getting worse. So he goes through the cold and the rain to see her one last time before she goes. And she's like, you're going to catch your death out here. And she goes off to school, and a week later he dies. So he really did, like, essentially he made himself go into worse health just for the sake of seeing her one more time. And that's why he says, I think he died for me. And it hits Gabriel really hard. Like, this whole night he's been worrying about this speech and how, oh, we shouldn't go back to the past and we shouldn't think about the past. He said the past is sort of ingrained in our hearts, and I haven't even known enough about my wife. And this whole last page I've just always loved, and I'm sorry you're going to have to bear with me. I know it's going to take a minute. He says here, after she's been crying, thinking about this kid, says she was fast asleep. Gabriel, leaning on his elbow, looked for a few moments unresentfully on her tangled hair and half-open mouth, listening to her deep-drawn breath. He's being very clear that he doesn't resent his wife for having these feelings. Says, so she had had that romance in her life. A man had died for her sake. It hardly pained him now to think how poor a part he, her husband, had played in her life. He watched her while she slept as though he and she had never lived together as man and wife. Because that's got to be, it's like such a big part of her life, and her thoughts and her soul had been wrapped up in this guy, and he didn't even know. It's like kind of looking at her like a stranger for a minute. And he says, his curious eyes rested long upon her face and on her hair, and as he thought of what she must have been then in that time of her first girlish beauty, this is weird dishonesty, he says a strange friendly pity for her entered his soul. He did not like to say, listen to this closely, he did not like to say even to himself that her face was no longer beautiful, but he knew that it was no longer the face for which Michael Fury had braved death. It's a terrible thing to say about your wife. He's like, I know the face that Michael Fury died for is not the face that I look at today. Like, she's older, she's more, worn in, the wrinkles are coming, and the gray hairs are coming, and he's like, God, this is not the woman that he died for. And so it's really weird that he would say that. Said perhaps she had not told him all the story. His eyes moved, and he wondered at his riot of emotions of an hour before. From what had it proceeded? From his aunt's supper? From his own foolish speech? From the wine and dancing, the merrymaking when saying good night in the hall, the pleasure of the walk along the river in the snow? Poor Aunt Julia. She, too, would soon be a shade with the shade of Patrick Morgan and his horse. Soon, perhaps, he would be sitting in the same drawing room, dressed in black, his silk hat on his knees. So he is talking about, well, you shouldn't have worries today, but he starts to think, she was looking kind of old tonight, my Aunt Julia. Like, she'll be dead soon. We'll have to deal with that. And what will that do? And he starts to kind of think about this in a serious way as he thought about the what his wife went through. And he says, one by one they were all becoming shades, better pass boldly into that other world in the full glory of some passion and fade and wither dismally with age. He thought of how she who lay beside him had locked in her heart for so many years that image of her lover's eyes when he had told her that he did not wish to live. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that. He said, I don't want to live if it's without you. That was what that boy said there. And then he died. He had never felt like that himself towards any woman, but he knew such a feeling must be love. He'd never felt, Gabriel had not felt, even by his wife, that he'd ever think, if I can't be around you, I wish not to live. So I guess if his wife died, he'd still go on. He wouldn't just wish to die at that moment. He'd be like, well, this sucks. But he says, I can't imagine anybody dying that I would just want to be dead if they were dead. Even my wife. And so it's very strange there. And he says here at the end, he starts looking at the snow, and it says, a few light taps upon the pane made him turn to the window. It had begun to snow again. He watched sleepily the flakes, the silver and dark, falling obliquely against the lamplight. The time had come for him to set out on his journey westward. Yes, the newspapers were right. Snow was general all over Ireland. It was falling on every part of the dark central plain, on the treeless hills, falling softly upon the bog of Allen, and farther westward, softly falling into the dark mutinous sand and waves. It was falling, too, upon every part of the lonely churchyard on the hill where Michael Fury lay buried. It lay thickly drifted on the crooked crosses and headstones and the spears of little gate on the barren thorns. His soul swooned slowly as he heard the snow falling faintly through the universe and faintly falling, like the descent of their last end, upon all the living and the dead. The story is called The Dead. So it's really sort of about the opposite of the values of his speech. That it is important to remember the dead. It's important to go back where we came from. And the snow is falling everywhere. We can't just have it be happy sunlight all the time. The snow still falls, and we should deal with the snow as it comes. So that's that. Research papers Sunday. Turn them in, please. It's easier for me to grade them before the class is over if you turn them in.
7 days after the day. All right.
Have a good one. And just so you know, I'm going to take that down. If anybody wants to have it, you can take it. But the blue stuff, it's pretty. I just can't leave decorations up. I just want to know that I did appreciate it and liked it.
What do you